Hey, everybody, welcome back to the weekly immigration news recap, where we break down what changed in U.S. immigration this week and what signals came from the Trump administration that could impact your immigration situation if you're a foreign national, or your client strategy if you're an immigration practitioner. Today is Thursday, September 4th. It's about 1:21 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this episode is going to be released tomorrow morning on Friday, September 5th. Hopefully, we get no news dumps between now and then, but we might. To cover the all the immigration news with me this week, I'm really lucky to be joined by Helen Partlow, managing attorney at Waypoint Immigration. So, Helen, thanks so much for making the time to recap the news with me this week and share some of your insights. We'll get into your background and what you do at Waypoint in just a minute. But first, tell everyone where you're joining from and how your now fall, I guess, coming up on fall is going so far.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm in New York, and today is actually my kid's first day of school. So in my mind, it is fall. It's no more summer. So you got that part right. But I'm on Long Island, so I'm like an hour and a half, 2 hours from New York City. I am barred in New York and Massachusetts. My firm is located in Massachusetts. I have lived in Massachusetts for a small amount of time in my life, but I returned back here and have been here ever since. So coming from New York is basically, yeah.
Yeah, as someone from Maine who has no love lost for people from Massachusetts, they can be a little tough to be around. No offense to your colleagues there. I know they're great. They're the exception.
Well, they definitely pointed out my accent when I lived there. That
Yeah.
was always like a constant thing. And, I'm not terribly into sports, but they always like to kind of bring that into play, Red Sox versus Yankees, etc. My son now, I mean, he is a giant Yankee fan. So he might have something to say, but at the time I was just like, okay, this is kind of stereotypical.
It really is. Yeah, the stereotype in the case of Massachusetts and New England sports fans is 100% accurate. So,
Yeah, yeah,
I can attest to that as one myself. I love that. I love that. I've lived all over the country in the U.S. and school starts like way too early. I think in the South and on the West Coast, and so
for
it's good to
sure.
hear that with your son that the after Labor Day first day of school tradition is still holding strong.
Yeah, it still holds here, and we have family in Connecticut, and I know they started a couple weeks ago before Labor Day, but New York is typically the week of Labor Day. So we had a couple of districts that started Tuesday and Wednesday, and our district was one of the last ones to start. So my kids were lucky they got some extra time.
Oh man, one of the last sounds like one of the last schools holding out to the
For
right
sure.
way to start school, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, before we dive into the news, can you tell folks listening a little bit more about your professional background and then your current practice and the types of clients that you support?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously do nothing but immigration. Now I started off doing real estate, transactional deals. That's what I did in Massachusetts. But ever since I did take off some time to raise both of my kids when they were younger, but ever since I kind of came back into it, I've been doing nothing but immigration law and nothing but NIWs the entire time I've been doing immigration law. So a little bit different. My practice has always been about the individual person, and that's what really aligns me well with Waypoint because the mission of the firm I'm at is to help the immigrant, foreign national as an individual because a lot of the time their company attorney, they might try to ask questions, but they don't have their interests at mind. So we specifically are trying to make a pathway for individual people to rely on and kind of go beyond that employer aspect of everything.
Yeah, it's great, and it's great for the foreign national to have options like you guys out there. And I know you and your colleagues are very active with putting out a ton of free informational content for prospective EB-2 NIW and EB-1A applicants. And I myself consume it to learn more about both of those visa categories. So really
Oh,
happy to have
thanks.
you here to break
Yeah, I'm
down.
always trying to like dispel the myths or, the rumors and things like that. I always think knowledge is power. It's, what makes someone, in a better position than the other person is because they have more knowledge as to how everything works. And, other than tax law, immigration law is one of the most complicated areas. So it's really difficult for, someone that has been born in America, went through law school, like, it's still very difficult to, like, learn all the nuances, like, I'm always learning every day too. I feel like everyone is always learning every day, so, I don't know, I think it's like if I can help someone else understand it that's coming from a different culture, different language, I mean, all these other things makes my mind blown, like, as to how much they can accomplish. So if I can help make their journey just ever so slightly easier when it's such an uphill battle, then I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah. And we're going to leverage that on the ground experience that you have working with clients on EB-2 NIWs today. For return listeners, you probably know the format of this podcast. We go through the big headlines of the week, mainly focused on what has been happening in the Trump administration when it comes to immigration policy updates or trends. But today, for two reasons. One, because the month of August just wrapped up. And two, because we have Helen here and we want to take advantage of her expertise. We're going to give our first look at Lawfully's data on EB-2 NIW approval rates for I-140s, and we're also going to look at I-140 approval rates for EB-1A as well. We'll start off with that in a minute, and then after Helen and I have a discussion on that new data, we'll go through some of the big headlines from this week because there are quite a few, including some that just popped up in the last couple of hours here. Joseph Edlow, the USCIS director, did an hour-long interview, which is fairly unprecedented for a USCIS director, but having that access is great. And if we have time at the end, we'll go through some of the highlights from that as well. So Helen, are you ready to jump into it?
Yeah, sure, let's go.
Great. So this is from a newsletter that I drafted earlier this morning that will go out later today. But Helen here is getting first look at it. It's from our Immigration Intel newsletter. And the big thing that we're covering this week, as I mentioned before, is the drop in I-140 approval rates for EB-2 NIW applications that occurred over the summer. So we've been tracking this behind the scenes at Lawfully since about May. So between May and June, we saw a pretty substantial dip in approval rates for the several hundred I-140 cases that were completed that we were tracking in our Lawfully consumer app for EB-2 NIW. And then that accelerated through July, where the approval rate, according to our data, dropped as low as 31%. And that approval rate held steady at 31%, according to our data in August as well. There's a handful of sort of caveats that I want to mention here, and I'll get into some of it with Helen as well. But USCIS, the most recent USCIS data that they've released officially, covers approvals between January and March 2025. They showed, so they don't report monthly like we do, they only report the quarterly average. The approval rate for EB-2 NIW I-140s at that time was 67%, as reported by USCIS. Lawfully, in the same time period, our data showed 63%. So there is a margin of error there. Our data is never going to be 100% exact, but we have a very strong sample of cases that we're tracking compared to the total number of USCIS completions for that category. So it's pretty strong. USCIS will release data for April through June, that quarter. They call it government Q3, but for the rest of us, it's Q2, likely on September 30th. We project that based on Lawfully's data, that the approval rate that USCIS will show will be somewhere between 45 and 51%. So Helen, with that, I want to go to you as somebody who has been working on EB-2 NIW cases for years now. What's your reaction to this drop that we're reporting, and what are you seeing on the ground with adjudication trends with your clients?
Well, what I thought was interesting about the graph that you have here for the NIWs is that you saw a dip again last fall in 2024 between like September and December, and then looked like it went back up in the winter, spring, and then now we're back down and we're back down lower than we were last fall. So it kind of gives you like the shape to it. And I do understand how like this would kind of come about because I felt like definitely last fall there was a higher RFE rate. And I feel like that there was ultimately a higher denial rate. And I think it's because that was a huge influx of applications. So it makes sense to me that it then did go back up a bit at the beginning of this year to kind of level off from that influx. I'm assuming, I think that they were like less filings overall. So it makes sense that it kind of bounced back a bit. And then I think what we're experiencing now as it kind of dips back down is kind of like the results of those that have been adjudicated like during the early months of the Trump administration. So obviously, I'm not sure which ones of these were premium or regular. If it was premium, obviously they would have been most likely submitted while Trump was president and now also getting results, obviously, while Trump was president. But those that are getting adjudicated now might have been part of regular processing from last year. So from the fall where we saw the first initial dip, they might be adjudicating them now. And if they were sent in last fall, the political climate has changed a lot. Right. So if you're in something like climate, anything with energy, green energy and things like that, and you applied last fall, you of course don't have any sort of a crystal ball as to what it's going to look like now when it's getting adjudicated. So now, people in that field, it makes sense to align to like the national goals of America to kind of focus the application on something like energy independence. So America's about, bringing supply chain here, but they're doing the same with energy about, being less reliant on other countries and kind of building up our own domestic kind of infrastructure and stuff. So I'm thinking it's kind of like a mix of maybe when it was submitted versus when it's adjudicated and what has maybe changed over the course of time between presidencies. So that's one thing. Um, and another thing, like, so if it was regular processing and if it's premium processing, um, I'm not really some attorneys say that they do think it has higher RFE rates. Some people say it doesn't. I don't know. I kind of don't really buy it that it makes too much of a difference either way. I think that this is maybe more talking about like policy shifting, but according to that too, like because the NIWs, they're all about aligning with what the person does, how it makes sense for America. Like, what are they doing to benefit America? And when America wants to change what it wants to focus on as to what that trajectory is, because, you change presidents, things, and especially political parties, things are going to change focus between all of that kind of happening. So I think that's part of what this is potentially like the shift of focus. But then on top of this, there's definitely been an overall higher level of scrutiny just across the board for NIWs, especially as far as it's not an analysis of the person's field. It's not an analysis, do they have an important job? Is their job title a good one? Or is their company important? Like they're looking at the individual. So they want to know, say you're in AI, because AI is kind of everywhere right now, and it has been for a little bit. If you're in AI, they're going to say, okay, great. Well, what are you doing in AI? Where is your impact going to land? They want to know, do you have evidence of this stuff? Like, the amount of objective evidence that they really want to have to prove these things has totally gone up. And the proposed endeavor is the foundation of the NIW. So that's like, how will you be impactful in the future in a way that America cares?
Yeah, I was gonna a lot of interesting stuff there, and I just wanted to clarify for those listening and those watching. But if you're listening, I'll add the link to this newsletter in the show notes on Spotify, so folks can go in and see the charts that Helen and I are looking at right now. But Helen, you mentioned sort of the difference between non-premium cases versus premium cases. I don't have exact figures for our data for the hundreds of cases that we're tracking on any given month, but we do know that our data skews more towards non-premium process cases
Okay.
because the nature of the Lawfully consumer app is you want better insight into case processing trends and times for your individual case. And if you have premium processing, you're less likely to put your need that info from our app. Though we do
Right.
still track some premium processing cases, so maybe we'll publish more clarification on that in the future. Um, but yeah, I think it's a great point that many of these applications would have been submitted to USCIS uh, back in the fall, right? If they were regular process, which is a
Right.
very different time and very different climate. How have you seen between some of the premium cases that maybe you've worked on with your clients versus the non-premium cases that you filed for them or with them last fall? What have changes have you seen? What are the major changes that you've seen in how USCIS has been adjudicating those compared, from October compared to this summer?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say probably most of our clients go with premium processing. So maybe my own experience is skewed, like how
Sure.
yours, you said, is kind of more towards regular. My experience is more skewed towards premium processing. And I guess I would say like the ones that are through like the transitional months, like December through early this year, as Biden was leaving and Trump was coming and he was like repealing executive orders and saying he's going to set up these things, but they weren't quite set up yet. It was kind of hard to like align it with a national importance. Like that's the first prong of the NIW is to show that it's aligned with different government goals. And when they're kind of changing and in flux, obviously there's still things that we can talk about, but it's, trying to think as the officer, and you don't know when is the officer looking at this. What has changed between the time I've now mailed this to when the officer gets it on their desk and is picking it up? Was something else repealed or was something else added? Was there a new executive order? So, um, I think that like with that is what I'm kind of thinking of. And the people that do regular processing, I mean, I think that there's nothing wrong with going either way. Obviously, the price tag is pretty hefty at 2,805. So if you don't have to do it, why bother spending the money? Unless I always tell people like, if it's going to give you anxiety to be waiting 8, 10, 12 plus months, however long regular processing is continuing to be delayed, it might make sense to do premium processing. But, with these figures, I'm not really sure if choosing to do one or the other makes too much of a difference other than just the transition of administrations,
You
like that
mentioned
those few months.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing you mentioned sort of in preparation for this podcast when you and I were emailing back and forth are the different ways that EB-2 NIW petitions are filed, self-filed versus by an
Yes.
employer. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit? And then I'm sure you do a lot of consultations in addition to actually working with clients on their cases. Have you heard anything different from consultations for certain types of EB-2 or certain profiles of EB-2 NIW applicants than maybe you were hearing 6, 8 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there's pretty much like three main choices. Either you bring this on your own and you try to DIY it, or you obviously hire an attorney and then they prepare it with you and for you. Or you, because perm is failing more, they're also pausing those programs. Some employers are then opting to bring in NIW on behalf of their employee instead of perm, just because, like I said, that's not viable for whatever reason. Um, and there really is a wide variety of people I talk to about that. So I have gotten some messages on LinkedIn where someone says, "Oh, thanks so much. I did this on my own. Your posts were helpful and they were able to get it done just through like learning about it and figuring things out on their own." I haven't heard a message like that lately. I feel like maybe that was more like last year when things were maybe more favorable. Um and then I've been getting a slew of consultations from people that are getting RFEs and or ultimately denials because their employers are the ones bringing it. And the employer typically does not ask for any help from, the applicant. They don't ask for any sort of documentation. They don't ask for any, "Oh, hey, what do you think of this? How can we describe your work? What's your future plan? What's any of these details?" Because like when I'm doing it with someone, it's very personalized. It's very much, aligning to their past, present, and future. And when you're looking at it from like the employer perspective and they're the ones bringing it the NIW, they seem to only be looking at the present and assuming everything else. So once in a while, I'll hear on consultations that they will have actually asked them to obtain a letter from like a past job, but I feel like that's very infrequent. They seem to be only looking at the NIW in the context of the one job that they're at right now, and not looking at any bigger picture. They're tying the proposed endeavor very much to the job title and to the company. And that's like a huge red flag, a big giant no no. I mean, you'll see that in RFEs all over the place saying, this person doesn't have like, I mean, they don't say this exactly in this way, but it's pretty much the proposed endeavor isn't any good because they're just going to continue doing their job. And that's not the point of the NIW. It's not tied to a job, it's not a perm,
Sure.
it's not any of those things. NIW is like a mission. So, like, the applicant is on a mission. They should be doing something, no matter what job they're at or outside of their job, even doing things just like in the industry. The NIW is very much a mission focused application, and these employer lawyers really are not framing it in that way and only making it like a very closed universe surrounded by what they know, which is just what the current job is. So, I feel like they definitely a lot of these RFEs like miss the mark on the proposed endeavor, and that's the foundation. So if you have a crumbly foundation, it makes sense that the rest of the house will fall when you kind of look at everything else. Um, I would say the one benefit that I have maybe seen is that when you're doing like a deep dive on prong two, showing how the applicant is capable of doing the things that they're claiming, because they are already working for the company, they know what kind of internal documentation they are allowed to submit. So that's always a big hurdle for people, ones that are applying and they're looking to do things through their job and they are having trouble like getting documents to prove that they've worked on projects that are impactful and things like that because of confidentiality and everything else. And a lot of the time the attorney can kind of know what's allowed, and that's not anything that they share with the applicant, though. So
Right.
the applicant has no idea most of the time what is being submitted on their own behalf. So that's, it kind of goes both ways. A very small plus, but ultimately, I mean, obviously, people only talk to me when things go wrong. I'm sure there are instances where it goes right, and those people don't need to talk to me. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had like back-to-back consultations from people from like the same companies talking about the same problem. So, it definitely seems to be not just like a one-off instance. It seems to be kind of how the employers are approaching NIWs these days. And I've definitely gotten more consultations about this now than ever before because I guess perm is just not working out or not working out in time or failing or there's layoffs and all sorts of reasons as to why perm is not really working out for a lot of people. So this is an option more and more, and that's why I guess I'm hearing about it more and more too.
Yeah, that's all really, really helpful context. I'll add that we aren't able to splice our data by those different by self filers versus filed with an attorney, retained individually by a foreign national versus an employer
Right.
filed petition yet. But give us maybe 6 months, 6 to 9 months, and we'll be able to splice our data that way in
Yeah,
the
that would be
future.
interesting to see how that would play out.
I'll tell you what, if we do it, we'll have you back on the podcast
Okay,
to unveil the first set of data with
that
everyone, and we can
sounds
cover it
good.
there. Final note from me on this on I-140 approval rates for EB-2 NIW. You mentioned RFE rates a couple of times. We haven't published anything on it yet. I'm not sure if we will for free or if we'll keep it behind a paywall or something. But uh, one thing that I will note is that that starting around May and June, according to our data, RFE rates started to tick down while denial
Mm,
rates increased. So I'm curious,
interesting.
again, I know, you're working with a very, specific sample of applicant here. And obviously you guys do your due diligence very thoroughly at Waypoint with your cases, maybe differently than some of the self filers who are included in this data set do. But Have you noticed that trend at all as well, where maybe fewer RFEs, but more just direct denials or denials after RFEs than before?
Um, I have not seen any direct denials. They've all either been direct approvals or they've gotten RFEs. I would say after getting an RFE, we still get approvals, so you still can get approved after an RFE, but I would say the majority do end up getting denied after getting an RFE.
Mm,
That just seems to be, and I've been tracking our own data just since like probably March. Like all the RFEs that started to be due in March. So they were issued like in January, due in March and beyond. And yeah, definitely we have not had a straight denial. Um, so I can't really comment on that part of it. But I don't know. The RFEs, they do kind of, make everyone depressed. And, I can't blame them, honestly, because your overall approval odds definitely do go down if you get an RFE. But it's hard because RFE rates also go up. So we tell people, you should probably count on an RFE these days. If you don't get one, then that's like a good thing. But I don't know, it's hard to balance when we're talking to people between like the reality and also keeping hope because you can still get approved. You can
yeah.
still get approved without an RFE. You can still get approved after an RFE. And, I am telling people that a lot of the time at least now it is depending upon how strong of the objective evidence they can give us. Like, how can you prove that you're doing the things that you're claiming or that you therefore can continue to be impactful in the future? So, it was kind of like a hard line to kind of navigate as an attorney because I find myself as a realist. So I don't really think of myself as a pessimist or an optimist, but in doing so, have to kind of also, I don't know, you don't want to like diminish someone's hope when it still could be possible and it's still getting approvals.
100%. And that's a point that I have made and will continue to make about the data that Lawfully publishes too. We're publishing the macro real time trends that we're seeing because we have the data available and the access to it. And if we don't do it, you're going to have to wait 3, 6, sometimes 9 months to see the data come out from USCIS. And by then, it's not very helpful. But I don't go so far as to interpret the data or in the sense of what the action or reaction should be to it. I leave
Mm,
that to folks like Helen. So if
yeah.
you're a foreign national and you're interested in the EB-2 NIW or you're curious about it, reach out to Helen or another attorney like her. If you see these approval rates, and she'll talk you through everything. I guess there's my little endorsement of you for the podcast, Helen.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Any final thoughts on EB-2 NIW approval rates before we move on to some other stories?
Um, I don't think so, other than just to say, they're still getting approved. You have to just prove your case. We just do more research. We definitely make sure that, we tell the officer 1 + 1 = 2. Because I always feel like if you just say 1 + 1, they may not know it's two. So definitely like making sure not to leave any holes, making the conclusions for the officer, telling them the whole story. Don't assume the officer is going to come to the same conclusion that something like someone curing cancer isn't actually important. You don't want to assume just because common sense might tell you, oh, of course that person should make sense to come because who doesn't want to cure cancer? But it's just, I say that as kind of like a joke sort of a thing. But you definitely need to make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's and just make sure everything lines up as strong as you can. And it is about telling a story. So, weaving everything in, giving it context and meaning, and helping the officer understand, where you're coming from, and then having just the evidence that proves it too.
Okay, Helen, the other trend that I've talked about in the last couple of weeks with Doug Rand and our Immigration Insiders meeting or back in August, and then with my guest on this podcast last week as well, is the drop in approval rates for I-140s for EB-1A. For August, our data shows that approval rates were at about 50%. A little bit of context here and an important note. Um, Previously, for July, we had reported the approval rate at about 44%, and I posted about that on LinkedIn, and it got a lot of attention. We did revise that number up when we looked at the data again to about 48%. In the newsletter, I explained sort of where the revision came from and where we noticed some slight discrepancies in the data, but it was still directionally about right and within our margin of error. So it was about 48% approval rate in July, about 50% in August, according to our data. And again, this is a drop from what USCIS reported between January and March, where the approval rate was at about 73% for
Hmm.
EB-1A I-140s. Similar trend, or between May and June, is when we saw the steepest drop for EB-1As, just like we did with EB-2 NIWs, just obviously not as steep. So Helen, what's your reaction to this data? What trends have you sort of been seeing in your practice on EB-1A for I-140s?
Yeah, so two things kind of come to mind. I'm thinking that more people are applying for EB-1A now because the EB-2 backlog is so large for everybody. I mean, there's a backlog for literally every country around the world, not just from those that typically get talked about, like China or India. It's literally everything. And this is just from like a gut feeling from just like talking to, colleagues and different foreign nationals and consultations and things. I think people are maybe trying for EB-1A and not completely understanding the criteria. And, you're showing that you're at the top of your field. Like this is a top level, high level, type of an application. So if someone thinks that, oh, well, I got an NIW approved, I've gotten a couple more things done. Let me try for EB-1A. Like it's not that simple, obviously, because then everyone would just do EB-1A. So I'm thinking that might be part of it, as far as maybe more of an applicant pool that doesn't quite understand that they don't quite meet the criteria. Um, then the second thing is that I have seen, and this is only within the last month or so, more RFEs coming in for EB-1As.
Mm.
So normally our firm just gets straight approvals for EB-1As. That's kind of like normal. Occasionally you'll get an RFE here and there, and sometimes can overcome it or overcome it through a refile or whatever. But we definitely have been seeing more EB-1A RFEs, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that yet. Um, as far like there was one that was maybe more expected to come back, and the client knew that it was more expected to maybe get an RFE. But the other ones, so again, I'm not sure if it's just a fluke. I'm hoping it's not the start of some sort of a new trend with EB-1A RFEs, but this is literally within the last month or so. So I don't know like results from them or not. And I don't know how other firms are doing either. I just know ours in particular got a few more than we expected. I'm talking about like a handful. It's not like a
Sure.
ton or anything. Um,
Was it also for mainly premium processed cases?
that I don't know. I'd have to go back and check. But like I said, most of our clients, EB-1As and EB-2 NIWs, do premium, especially EB-1As. I feel
Yeah.
like they're even more likely to do premium than an NIW. So, um, again, I'd have to go and double check, but I'm assuming that these are probably all premiums.
Yeah. Come to our next Immigration Insiders meeting with Doug Rand on September 17th. I don't know if you know Doug, but he was a senior advisor to the USCIS director in the Biden administration, knows a lot about the inner workings of USCIS, obviously. And we'll pull up some data for EB-1A RFEs and review it then, and you can tell us what you're seeing in your practice as well.
That'll be great.
Perfect. Anything else on EB-1As that you want to mention before we kind of breeze through some of the final news stories?
No, I don't think so. They typically, obviously, they have a higher approval rate than NIWs. Those that kind of really do meet the criteria meet it effectively. So that's really the only idea that came to mind when I was looking at this particular graph.
Yeah. And we'll continue to track these trends in September and October. The USCIS data for, again, April through June will come out hopefully at the end of September, and we'll report on that as well. Quick plug before we move on to some of the news stories. If you're interested in seeing, this is for everyone in the audience, and Helen too, if you're interested. If you're interested in seeing a more detailed breakdown of all of Lawfully's data, in the coming weeks, we are going to have a new offering. It's going to be a premium monthly report for immigration practitioners covering 20 plus of the most common employment-based NIV and IV case types. The report will include detailed approval rates, RFE rates, and dynamic real-time case processing times, because the USCIS case processing times just lag and are unfortunately not super reliable, as I know many immigration practitioners know. We'll also be featuring exclusive commentary from some of the former USCIS executives who have run service centers and have run field offices and participate in our Immigration Insiders meetings. So if you're interested in that and you want to get an early sneak peek, just shoot me an email. It'll be in the show notes as well. And it is going to be a paid subscription report. It'll be a free offering. I'll be totally transparent about that as well. Awesome. Okay, Helen, we got a few minutes left, so let's pivot here to some of the news stories. Okay, first one, and I know that this is fairly it's not surprising news, but it's news nonetheless. But the State Department reported on September 2nd that the annual limit for the EB-2 category was reached for green cards. Pretty typical with what we've seen in past years, right? But can you maybe just tell folks who don't know what this means for anyone has a pending EB-2 green card application?
Yeah, so there's, a certain limit as to how many they allow per year, and we are now at the end of the fiscal year. So fiscal year starts October 1st. So, we should be getting the visa bulletin usually around the middle of the month, like a couple weeks ahead of time. So we will hopefully see some progression in these visa bulletins. That's what's kind of typical. I'm not really expecting any retrogression or anything like that. And then they'll become available again. You can still apply for like an NIW and EB-1A. It's just once your date becomes available, and you put in for your adjustment of status or go through consular processing, there is no visa they can give you. So it's really more for people that are on like phase two part of that kind of a process, but this is typical. It's to be expected.
Whenever I talk about this stuff with immigration practitioners, I'm always reminded of how nuanced it is for anyone who's like going through this for the first time, where there's the multi-phase, multi-step process to getting a green card. The I-140 is different than the I-485 and
Yep,
et cetera, et cetera. Um, okay, well, we'll
it
keep
is
an
a
eye on it.
maze.
Yeah, that's why folks hire attorneys like you to help them navigate through
Right.
it. Okay, another piece of news from last Friday. I referenced it earlier, but we tend to have uh, in the Trump administration a lot of Friday news dumps, and this one came right before Labor Day, and it got a lot of traction amongst the practitioner community on LinkedIn because USCIS announced that starting at the end of October, they're no longer going to accept checks in the form of payment. So Helen, can you maybe explain like the significance of this, maybe for your practice, but also for um, foreign nationals as well that you're working with who maybe aren't directly attached to this, but will still be impacted nonetheless.
Yeah, so I mean, the applications that I do, EB-2 NIW and EB-1As, they have to get mailed in. There is no online submission. So we've always attached a check and sent it off and, sent it off to the USCIS gods and hope for the best. But at this point, we won't be allowed to do checks anymore. Instead, of course, there's another new form. There's two forms. You can either do it through ACH or you can do it through credit card. So you're either submitting a paper check or you're submitting a paper form. To me, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. I'm waiting for the day where we can just submit these things online and not have to print out thousands of pages is what, each application kind of comes out to. That's really the day I'm waiting for, and then so you mail in these applications and then they scan it and then they send it out internally. And that just kills me. Like, I don't want to kill all these trees. Like, it's such a waste of paper and
Yeah,
like resources and everything. So that's
and
just
leaves
that's what it makes me think of.
yeah, and leaves a lot of room for clerical error, which
Yeah, so
I've
mailroom issues, that
yeah,
certainly has happened.
yeah.
So,
So it's a positive step, but I know talking to some practitioners that the logistics and the rollout of it they're a bit worried about, but they have a couple of months to get prepared. So we'll see where it goes.
yeah, it's not till
Um,
October.
yep. Okay. next one, another big piece of news that came out the other day, um, was that Secretary of State Pete Hegseth announced that he would be giving essentially lending 600 military lawyers to become temporary immigration judges. So we're looking at a news article from the Associated Press covering this, and as always, I'll link this in so folks can go and read the full article for themselves. But essentially, what this would be doing is almost doubling the number of immigration attorneys, or excuse me, immigration judges that there currently are. Under the Trump administration so far, there's actually been, by counts and some reporting, about 100 immigration judges who have been fired. So this would help supplement those who are no longer there, but also add to it. And as part of this, I know USCIS and DHS sort of changed, or DOJ, one of the agencies changed the rules around who could qualify to be an immigration judge. So, Helen, I know this isn't super pertinent to your practice, but any comments on the story?
Yeah, so I mean, military lawyers have a very specialized purpose for the specialized circumstances of the military. So, taking someone that has no immigration experience and kind of throwing them into it, I think it definitely does a disservice. It's not like they're getting a lot of training. I think it's only like 2 months or so until they would be expected to kind of start. And I do understand there is a big backlog, and it is kind of obviously part of a problem here, but I don't think this is necessarily the way of going about fixing that. Um, just because it's like such a different purpose. And I think part of the tactic here is using the word military, using specifically military lawyers, because when you're saying that to the layperson, oh, they're bringing in military lawyers for immigration, this makes it seem like there's some big giant need, that there is some military response required or some military aspect that is needed for this job to help get control of such a big problem. And that's really not true at all. So I think it is part of the tactic is to have that kind of an impression.
Yeah, it's a story we'll continue to report on the ramifications of once these new judges get put into place, and we see any changes immigration court going forward. Also, I should note, I think I misspoke and I said Pete Hegseth was the Secretary of State, not the Secretary of Defense, but he's the Secretary of Defense. I'm so used to talking about Marco Rubio in this podcast, so forgive me if I
Right,
made
right.
that error. Related to this story, and we'll wrap up in a minute or two after this, Helen, because I know you got to run. But related to this story, brand new news, fresh off the press this morning, is that USCIS announced that they will be adding a new force of special agents that will be law enforcement officers who work for USCIS. This is pretty consistent with what USCIS Director Joseph Edlow has been talking about since his Senate confirmation hearing back in May, that he views USCIS as becoming an enforcement agency in partnership with ICE, HSI, some of the other government agencies that are focused on immigration enforcement. He did mention that this in an interview that we'll reference talk about in a minute, that this force will be primarily focused on fraud and fraud prevention, but it will be different than the current fraud office, the current fraud unit at USCIS. So I'll paste the link to the USCIS announcement for folks to read and look at themselves. But Helen, any reaction to this news story?
Um it's, I guess we'll just see what happens, but USCIS is just, this is not what they're used for. They're like, to help look through benefits and getting people's visas approved, like USCIS, that's where we send the NIWs, that's where we send the EB-1As. That's the officers that look at them and the different criteria and they approve or RFE or deny and whatnot. And it's just, that's not what their purpose is per se. And, by saying this, it makes it seem like there is not something in place already, like they already have ICE for enforcement and things. So I'm not really sure what the purpose is for this, other than some other sort of a tactic going on here.
Yeah.
Um, with just, using immigration as something to be talked about in a political kind of way.
Yeah, and I will say the new director Joseph Edlow has been very consistent on his belief that USCIS is more should be more of an enforcement agency than just the historical benefits agency that it's been. We're not going to have time to cover it today. We'll cover it in next week's podcast, but same USCIS Director Joseph Edlow earlier this morning did an hour-long, wide-ranging interview with the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a think tank in DC, talking about a whole bunch of things, including this new announcement, talking about H-1Bs, some big news, and also potential immigration fee increases coming down the pipeline. So there's too much to cover today, Helen, but for those who are listening, we'll cover it in the podcast next week. And hopefully, Helen will post about it on LinkedIn. You could chime in your thoughts there. But Helen, I'll leave it at that. I know you got to run to some other calls here. I really appreciate you joining me today to cover the news. It was really, really helpful for me to have your insight to help supplement this new data that we were releasing at Lawfully. So I'm really grateful for you for that. Any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
No, I just appreciate having, some real-time information because like you said, once it's posted months down the road, we're already into the new trend and it's kind of retrospective and it's not really helpful for in the moment things. So I appreciate what you guys do and having a platform to kind of share insights and, analysis of different things that are important for immigrants and for Americans alike.
Absolutely. We'll keep doing it, and we'll keep partnering with smart folks like you to help us interpret it and provide more context around the data that we're sharing. Helen, for folks who are listening who want to reach out, maybe for a consultation, maybe to talk with you, how can they get in touch? How can they follow your work? Tell them about maybe some of the content that you put out as well.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. You can just look up Helen Partlow. I have a free newsletter on there called NIW Made Simple, trying to make these complicated things simple enough for other people to understand if they want to pursue an NIW. That way they kind of know what they're getting into, so to speak, and kind of understanding the nuances beyond that. But if you did want to, have a call with me, you can go to waypointimmigration.org. You can make an appointment. There's different categories on there, NIW, AB-1As, etc. And we'd be more than happy to help assess where you're at, if you're ready, if you need some additional time, and just kind of take it from there.
Amazing. Well, we'll put the links to all of that in the show notes, so folks can go ahead and follow Helen's work and reach out to her if they're so inclined. Well, Helen, thank you again. We'll have to have you back on again soon. Again, if we can splice that NIW data in the way we talked about, you heard it here. I promise you that you'll be the first to come on and talk about it with us.
I think that would be great. I would love to know what that would look like.
All right. Well, thanks again, Helen, and have a great rest of your day. And thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.